Hello everyone. So today I'm gonna show you if I can beat the daredevil, which is one of the newest boards in chess. So let's get right into it. I'm playing this with white pieces. First I just to move my pawn to e4, moved its pawn to e6. Now I can move my pawn to d4, controlling these four squares of the center. It moved its pawn to d5. Now I can capture that pawn with my pawn. It recaptured my pawn with its pawn. Now I can develop my knight to f3. It moved its bishop to d6. Now I can also develop my other knight to c3. It moved its pawn to a6. But now I can just capture that pawn on d5 with my knight. It moved its king to f8. Now I can retreat my knight to c3. It moved its pawn to b5. Now I can move my bishop to d3. It moved its queen to e7, giving a check to my king. So I should move my queen to e2. It captured my queen with its queen, so I should recapture it. It moved its pawn to a5, controlling this square instead of protecting that pawn. But now this pawn is not being protected anymore. So I can just capture it with my bishop. It moved its pawn to c6, attacking my bishop. So I should retreat my bishop to c4. It moved its bishop to c7. Now I can finally castle to the king's side. It moved its pawn to h6. Now I can move my bishop to f4. It moved its knight to d7. Now I think that it is planning to go here. But it won't go because my bishop, my pawn and my knight are protecting this square. So now I should try to move my knight to c3. It moved its bishop to a6, offering for a trade which I will accept. It recaptured my bishop because I captured it. Now I can move my rook to e1, controlling this diagonal, controlling this open file. It moved its rook to a8. But now I should try to put a partial on this bishop. So for that I should move my knight to h4. It moved its bishop to g5. So I can just capture it with my bishop. It recaptured my bishop with its pawn. Now I should move my knight to f3. It moved its rook to h6, but it left this pawn hanging, which I can capture now. It moved its knight to b8. Now I should try to put attack on this square, because if I will manage to get my rook here, then it would be game over, checkmate, because then my piece would be protecting this square and my rook would be giving a check and controlling that square. So I should move my rook to e2. Now my rook to e1. It moved its knight to f6. Now it is controlling this square. So I should try to get it out of here. But how can I do that? Now I think that I should move my pawn to d5. It captured my pawn with its pawn. So I should recapture it with my knight. It moved its king to g8. But now I can just capture its knight and check the king. It captured my knight back. Now I think that I can at least check the king with the rook to e8. It moved its king to g7 because it was the only move available. Now I can retreat my knight to f3. It moved its rook to h5. But now I can just capture that knight with my rook because it is undefended. It moved its rook to a7. Now I should try to promote one of my pawns to a queen. Because if we would trade both of the rooks, then I almost wouldn't be able to checkmate the king with just two pawns and one knight also. Because of that, now I should move my pawn to g4, attacking this rook. It moved its rook to c7. But now I can just capture its rook with my pawn. It moved its rook to c6. Now I can move my knight to d4 attacking its rook. It moved its rook to b6. So I can just capture it with my rook. It moved its king to g8. Now I can capture that pawn on f6 with my rook. It moved its king to g7. Now I think that I should move my rook to f3. Now my rook to h3. Now it is protecting this pawn. I can move my pawn to h6 check. It moved its king to g8. But now I can give a check with the rook to e8. It moved its king to h7 because that was the only move. Now I can move my knight to f5. It moved its king to g6. But now I can move my pawn to h7. And now finally I can promote my pawn to a queen. It moved its pawn to f6. But now let's do checkmate. I can move my rook to f3 check. It moved its king to g6. I can move my queen to g8 check. And finally my rook to h3 to do checkmate. So I hope that you liked the video. Please make sure to like and subscribe. Please comment how you thought the video was. And have a great day.